Welcome to Finding Common Battlegrounds. This is the podcast that's dedicated to civil discourse between the left and the right, which is sometimes an anomaly these days. We are going to we talk about in this podcast we usually talk about two articles. We talk about something from the left, something from the right, and then we get perspectives because Ryan Cragen, one of the guests, is a liberal, and I, Tommy, am a conservative. Today we're going to do we're trying something new again. We're having another guest on our show. Today we have Ken Good. He's a bail bond attorney. So we will be talking about bail bonds. And so this is going to be fun. We're going to dive into this, something that I don't think we've ever talked about on our show.
No, it's a new one for us.
So that's going to be exciting. So before we get started, we're going to talk about our sponsor, bidets. Lux Bidet. If you are we have to ask, Ken, are you a bidater? Are you into bidets?
No.
Sorry, I know that's awkward, but literally Lux Bidet is our sponsor.
I don't think I have ever bideted. I've used I've never.
No,
I'm just
you're missing out, Tom. Okay, so one of the things so Tom and I are always trying to find agreement, right? It's finding common battlegrounds. One of the things that we definitely agree on is that everybody should use a bidet. So we reach right across the aisle and it's like bidets for everyone. So,
well, I mean, hey, I have a special needs daughter who has some arm issues and she has issues going to the bathroom. So she would be a total fan.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we may have to get you a Lux Bidet.
Once you do it, man, you never go back. Ryan and I are big fans. Lifetime members.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go ahead and get started. First, let's just get a brief, Ken, if you can just give us a brief introduction about yourself, and then we'll actually just jump into the article. I'll let you introduce it. But first, let's just, Ken, give us a brief history of yourself.
My grandfather was a sharecropper. On my mom's side of the family, he was probably the anchor of our family. My dad's side of the family goes all the way back to the American Revolution.
Oh, wow.
One of Benjamin Franklin's brothers is one of my great whatever grandfathers. But saying that, we consider the Franklin side of the family the crazy side of the family. My parents were both public school teachers. They taught us the importance of an education. So my mom and I used to watch Perry Mason late at night at 10:35 on Sunday nights. And so I wanted to go to law school. I went to law school. That was my life dream, and came to Tyler, Texas. I had a job offer for Dallas or for Tyler, and I came to Tyler because I was a small town boy and I got lost every time I went to some event in Dallas. I was trained to be an attorney probably by one of the best attorneys at the time for defense counsel in the state. Did a lot of medical malpractice defense representing doctors and hospitals. We were on court TV. I argued a lot of cases at the courts of appeals and Supreme Court. Argued cases really young in my career, and was board certified by the time I was a 5-year attorney, which is the minimum. You have to be a 5-year attorney before you can even take the test. And then I got a call, started representing the bail world, and I have developed a practice on that's very unique. There's very few attorneys in the state of Texas that do that. There's probably 3 attorneys with statewide practices, and I'm one of them. I was asked to go to a hearing in Dallas on a case called O'Donnell versus Harris County, which is one of the most important cases in the bail reform world. And I went to that hearing and came out freaking out because I thought the judge was completely wrong in the direction she was going. And I thought she did not understand the issues. And she very muchly said she was going against what the status quo was. And I think that case has upended the world of bail in the United States. And I started calling people and saying, we have to become experts on this area. And that's what I set out to do. I've written a lot of articles on these issues. And I think I've been proven to be correct. That same judge has now been reversed 7, 8, or 9 times on her rulings that she made. In fact, the most recent ruling, the Fifth Circuit said that case should have never been filed in federal court. And that was appealed, that language was appealed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they denied the petition for cert just a month ago. So I think I was proven correct. and the damage that has been done to the criminal justice system, and I believe substantial damage has been done to the criminal justice system as a result of her rulings, is still being untangled to this day. And so that's kind of who I am. I'm married. That's probably the most thing I'm most proud of. I have two girls, and I am a very happy married attorney to another attorney. And I learned very early in my life as a married attorney is you do not quote case law to your wife in bed. You would have thought you wouldn't have been told that, but I did have to be told that.
I get that. I'm married to a college professor as well, and we have strange conversations. So I get that. That's really helpful. I appreciate the background. I think that's helpful for our listeners. People will have a good sense of this. Tom, some
I was
thoughts?
watching a clip from Perry Mason today, just a short one. So that's crazy.
Yeah. And just as a bonus, right? Tom and I are both from a very small town in Utah. It's called Morgan, Utah. How big is Tyler? How many people are in Tyler? We'll see if we've got you beat for smallness.
Yeah, you've got me beat, but probably 90,000 is probably Tyler. But I grew up in a town of 1,200 people.
Ooh,
and
okay.
I live outside Tyler at a town called Bullard, which probably has about the same amount of people living in it, less than 2,000 people.
Less than 2,000. The county we grew up in when we were there, right? So Tom's kind of back there more than I am because he's still in Utah. There were 11,000 people in the county. So very, very small town. When I'd look out my parents' back window, there were cow pastures, right? So that's the area where we grew up. And I used to joke, it's not really a joke. I mean, it's just true that the weekend activities in Morgan, Utah were rodeos and crash up derbies. And I don't know if they still do that, Tom. Do they still they've got a rodeo up there? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We lived in the city limits, and we had milk cows behind our house. Cows behind our house that we milked every morning and every evening. When my brother went off to college, they were like, "You miss your brother," because we used to fight like cats and dogs. You miss your brother. I'm like, "Are you kidding me? I get to do this in peace and quiet."
I get it. Okay,
Ryan, why don't you introduce the article then? And maybe give your take, and then of course we're gonna hear Ken's view on it, and then we'll give him like kind of the opposing side, or he can give the rebuttal.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously there's an issue here with bail bonds, right? And I'm assuming most of our listeners have a general sense. I mean, we have an expert on here to talk about bail, right? So that's great. But just vaguely speaking, right, when people get arrested, depending on the severity of the offense, judges will set a bail, right, allowing them to get out of jail while they wait their trial, things like that. And it's become an issue. And I first became aware of this actually watching John Oliver. I don't know if you're familiar with John Oliver's show, but he's got an interesting talk show. I don't watch it all the time, but he had a pretty good kind of discussion of bail. And so when you brought this up and, kind of approached this, and I looked it up a little bit, the article I found was actually a PolitiFact article from the Poynter Institute, which actually is based here in Tampa, which is kind of fun. And it was checking.
Ryan, sorry. I'm a noob. So you got a guy that's like done something and the judge is worried that he might not show up, right? So he'll be like, okay, I'm going to set bail at like $5,000.
Oh, it'd be much higher. Yeah.
And that's to ensure that he comes back, right? Is 5,000 low?
I think 5,000 low, but Ken, you tell us, because this is more your area. Is 5,000 a low bond, or is that?
Depends on the charge. If it's a felony, that's a low bond. If it's a misdemeanor, that's a high bond.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and so if they've done something pretty egregious, or they're maybe looked at as a flight risk, then it's going to be much higher, like 100,000 or something.
Or they could just deny bail entirely, and then they can't get out. Right?
Yeah, he has to stay in jail. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's all going to depend on where you are. I mean, there are some areas like misdemeanors. I mean, raise the bail because you have a long criminal history, but there's certain charges that they don't have a right to deny you bail. So in Texas, we have certain charges in our Constitution that they can deny you bail, but you would have to do something first for any other charge. They would have to set bail. They may set it even higher because they don't want you to get out because they can't deny bail.
So it's like a right, like we're not going to deny it, but it's $1 million and you're not going to be able to come over. Yeah. Okay. And then the idea is, most of the time this bail, because the criminal can't get access, they'll like access a bail bondsman, right? And then this bail sort of collateral, right? And then if that the person who's charged does not show up, then that bail bondsman is now on the hook for that money or to get that person to show up to court. Is that, am I?
Well, that's generally correct, except for you have to understand that bail is regulated in this country by everybody. So the federal government regulates bail for federal charges.
Mhm.
And that's what we've talked about is not the way the federal government does bail. They have a release or detain system. So predominantly they have bail sometimes, but very rarely. So you're either going to be released or detained. And when they changed the law in the 80s, they were holding 25% of the people that were arrested. Now they hold about 75%, and you don't get released. So
Really?
yes, and so what we're talking about is at the state level. The states
Okay.
regulate each state
Mhm.
regulates their bail system. And so some states, there's a couple of states like Illinois that doesn't have bail. They just have a release or detain system now. New Jersey has switched to something like that. But what we've talked about is what the majority of states have, and how they regulate getting people to court to answer to the charges that have been filed.
Okay. Well, appreciate that. So
That's
it's good to
good.
get clarity. Obviously, we do have an expert on here, so that's useful to get that kind of clarity on what's going on. So I think where the issue has come up in recent years is there are some people, right, who are arrested for charges, usually relatively minor charges. Let's call them misdemeanors generally, who are given bail, so they have a chance to actually pay, to get out while they're waiting their trial date, but they don't have any money, so they're impoverished, right? For whatever reason, we don't have to go into the details of why they're impoverished, and because they don't have money and they don't have the collateral to pay a bail bondsman or anything like that, they end up staying in jail for quite a long period of time awaiting trial, because they just can't afford bail. And so it seems, and again, like this is an open discussion, right? It seems as though at least a subset of people, mostly on the left, have taken issue with this and said, we're basically creating a debtor's prison now, that people who don't have money are being forced to stay in prison, often over relatively minor charges. And the problem is the bail system. Okay, so that's kind of where I think the issue is coming up, is people are saying this doesn't seem fair. We've got people who are staying in prison just because they can't pay their bail. And
This
then
is what the critics are saying of
this is what the critics are saying. And so the article that I found was, like I said, a PolitiFact article from the Poynter Institute. Gavin Newsom, the Democratic governor of California, he made a very specific point, and PolitiFact checked it, right? So his point was that the US and the Philippines are the only two countries in the world that actually have a bail system like this. And the PolitiFact, they checked that and they were like, there are a couple of minor exceptions to this, but he's generally right that we are one of the few countries on the planet that actually have that kind of bail system. Again, a couple of exceptions here and there. So I thought that was actually really interesting. I have some thoughts about that, but I would actually like to get Ken's take at this point, and Tom's, right, on, is that your understanding, right? Are we kind of unique, us in the Philippines, in having this bail type system? And what's your take on that?
This is an issue that comes up periodically in our world, and I will just cut to the chase. I don't agree with this. I don't think that is a correct conclusion. First you have to start out with, hey, if that's the type of bail system you're talking about, then the federal government isn't even that type of a bail system. And so you have to look closely at what they're talking about. I did just some research today on this, and I would say, are there other countries that have a right to release that references bail? I mean, Australia does, Canada does, Czech Republic does. Denmark has it in their constitution, but it's very rarely used. France talks about bail. India, if you just search bail, and you'll periodically pull up stories about somebody in India being granted bail or denied bail. And then I would just, it goes on. New Zealand, Republic of Ireland, United Kingdom. In fact, our system of bail dates back to the Magna Carta from England. So, before the Magna Carta, you had the king had a right to hold somebody that was charged with a crime.
Habeas corpus right there.
Yeah, and you didn't even hold them. I mean, you never try them. If you didn't
Right.
ever try them, you just held them. And so the Magna Carta was the first time that the king agreed to limit his authority or limit his power so he could not hold somebody. And so our system of bail actually dates back to that. When people came over to the United States, they brought the concept of a right to release. And the problem, I think what we're not discussing here is, the countries generally that do not have a constitutional right to release as you're waiting trial, they have a right to hold. So they don't really follow the Magna Carta. Even some of these countries that I've listed, they don't have a right to release. They just have a presumption, which that's what the federal government has. They have, a right to, you can be released, but then on certain charges, you're presumed to be a flight risk. So I think the discussion should be, where do you have a constitutional right to release? And I'm kind of concerned that there are very few countries that give you a right to release while you're waiting trial. You can be held probably in the majority of countries in the world. And I think that should be the focus of these discussions, because if a government has the right to hold you, they can hold you hostage and make you plead guilty. That's one of the arguments that's been used that you're just using against bail. I do not agree that in this day and age that we have people being held on misdemeanors across the country that can't afford a bond. I think that's a talking point, but that is not, I believe, a reality. And wherever it's being looked at, that's what the conclusion has been found.
Okay, I want to clarify a little more, because so what I got from the article is that they're saying only the U.S. and the Philippines are using a commercial based it has a commercial based industry of bail bondsmen, right? Meaning there's this third party industry that's acting as the bail bondsman on behalf of the person who's been charged. And is that kind of everyone's understanding that, like,
Yeah.
France has bail and yeah, Australia has bail systems, but and I'm guessing, and it sounds like they are leaning more towards release or detain, and they're using bail a lot more judiciously, whereas we're using a lot more, and there's a whole third party industry that's kind of come into play. Is that fair?
Well, I'm thinking the article, that was the point of it. They were saying that, but I just felt like when you're talking about that, you're talking about terms. And so I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, but let's just say for the purpose of discussion that I'm not going to quibble that there's two countries that use a commercial bail system.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that question.
All right, I got another question. So, because like I said, I don't know. I have yet to be arrested.
That's a good thing, Tom. It's good that you don't know the system.
Never
That's
say
good.
never. But if I was arrested, and I posted bail and say, yeah, it was a misdemeanor, $5,000. What is that going to cost? I'm assuming the bail bondsman's putting this up, and I'm getting charged a fee for this, right? Like, interest or whatever you want to call it. What does this usually cost? I'm trying to understand how much of an encumbrance is this on the person who's been charged, right? Is this 10%? What's the average fee?
It depends on, again, where you are in the country. Texas does not regulate bail currently, how much is being charged. There are states that do, and there are states that regulate whether you can make payments. But Texas, by and large, if your bond is set at $1,000, your premium would be 10%, which would be $100.
Okay.
And the bondsman would be willing to take a payment plan for that $100. So that's why I find it very difficult to say, somebody that's languishing on misdemeanor can't get out of jail. I just don't agree with that, especially under the current climate, because what you've mentioned about, bail's unfair. That's not the first argument. The first argument was made is we have to change bail because it's going to be held unconstitutional. It is unconstitutional. And so the argument you're making about fairness is the fallback after two courts of appeals, the 11th and the 5th Circuit, held bail constitutional. So now that they did go to that argument, but that wasn't their first argument. Their first argument is we have to change because bail's unconstitutional. No, we've had two courts of appeals hold it constitutional. So the fallback is, well, it's just not fair. Here's the problem. Let me just quote a mayor at a town hall meeting about crime. She said, until you have an alternative to the private bail system that has the same accountability and the same low failure to appear rate, you don't have an alternative. And that's the problem. Every alternative that's being used or being tried has 2 or 3 times the failure to appear rate. So instead of 100 people, 10 people failing to show up for court when they were supposed to, you've got 20, 30, 40, 50 people. And that compounds over a number of weeks in our urban areas. And that's where you're seeing backlogs created. You can't hold anybody accountable because nobody's coming to court. And that's where we get, the criminal justice system collapsing, and you just see hold cell dismissal of cases. You see states like California that has an 80% failure to appear rate in their misdemeanor courts where they use
is that
simple
true?
release. I did a podcast with the DA from Yolo County in California, and he said the failure to appear rate in California on misdemeanor courts is 80% because they use simple release mechanisms.
Well, and so what I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like, right, were you saying Illinois has a release and detain? And so it's basically like, okay, we're going to release or we're going to detain, but we're not going to do bail. And sounds like California's adopted this as well.
No,
And
California tried to, and their voters did a referendum and rejected.
I see. So this is an article where there was presented, but then it failed. I see. And then but in the article, it did cite that like some systems are using sort of a flight risk, right? A risk assessment. Like, okay, well, he didn't show up last time, so we're going to detain him this time. But that's only kind of works once you have some history of them not appearing, right?
The big knocks on the risk assessment is that the risk is, it uses an algorithm that is great for predicting what groups will do. And one of the reasons why it's great at predicting what groups will do, it looks at the racial makeup of the group, but it's not good when it looks at a single person from that group, but it still takes into consideration the racial group. And so they're being attacked for having a racial element. The number one indicator of whether you'll show up for court is your criminal history. And like Texas just 4 years ago or 2 years ago added the requirement that judges had to review the criminal history in setting bail. But that's the number one indicator.
Seems like the primary criteria would be your criminal history, but
yeah, but the problem with that is having the ability to look at it. Like Texas, when they passed it, it wasn't the requirement, it was getting the database and getting the data so that judges could look at it. We did not have a central database that would provide that information to judges. So they had to put that together at the same time. And so we're pulling from the Texas Department of Public Safety records, and they call it a public safety report. But all it does is display the criminal history to the judge, and they're required to review that before setting bail. I agree with you completely. It just makes common sense. I can't believe we're not doing that before 2022.
Right.
But we didn't have the ability from a technology standpoint to be able to do it.
Yeah. I don't know if you caught the algorithm thing. So that's something that's come up. I'm a sociologist, right? So it's come up a bit in the stuff that I do. Those algorithms for setting bail and sentencing guidelines, they've been heavily criticized because they did include race as a factor. And like, as soon as you do that, I mean, you're just opening yourself up for criticism. So I'm glad you admitted that, like, there is a pretty easy way to criticize it if it's like, oh, and they're Black, so they're more likely to be a flight risk. And you're like, oh my gosh, you cannot factor that in, right? Like that seems really,
like
really
it's inaccurate too.
Yeah, it's really problematic, right? Now, I think it would be better if it just had like criminal history and the likelihood of them.
I've never been a fan of the risk assessment, and the people pushing it are pushing it as a replacement to what the system was using at the time. So if a county like Harris County was using a bail schedule, and people were not, like you said, could not afford the amount that was set according to the schedule. Well, they were saying, well, we can just replace all that with an automated procedure called a risk assessment. Well, if the courts don't like one, that's automated, they're not going to like the other that's automated. But the problem is, what's the remedy? Like if you have a bail schedule, the remedy is not release if you can't afford the bond. The remedy is a right to a hearing to ask for a deviation from the scheduled amount. That's what the whole O'Donnell case was about. Judge Rosenthal from Harris County, or from Houston, the federal judge, she ruled that because of the violation of the procedural violation, they had a right to release. And the appellate court said, no, you have a right to a hearing. You have identified a procedural issue, so the remedy has to be procedural as well. And where she got in trouble is she was trying to mandate a substantive remedy, and the court said no. And that's where she got in trouble, and that's what the ramifications we're still trying to overcome.
Okay, so I appreciate this. I think this is actually a really helpful conversation. I don't know that I'm fully persuaded at this point, right? But like this is good.
Ryan,
This is
you
good.
didn't really
We
say
got
what
lots
your
of time
take
left.
was.
We have lots of time left.
Yeah, we do. So I have a couple of questions, right? So one is a question. The other is kind of pushing back a little bit on this. So one, I do like to point out, again, I'm a sociologist. I'm not a criminologist, right? So my area of expertise is not criminology. I don't want to pretend like I am an expert on this, right? But I do talk about some of the statistics. Do either of you know which country has the highest per capita incarceration rate on the planet?
The United States.
It's the United States,
Yeah.
right? We incarcerate more people than any other country per capita, right? Now, that doesn't mean we have the most people in prison. China has that, honor. Congratulations, China. But per capita, we have more people in prison than any
Yeah,
other
but
country.
where does every country in the United States send their drugs? And where does 80% of our crime come from? The drug trade. So, yeah, absolutely. We're going to have the most people in jail because everywhere in the world, they're sending their drugs to the United States.
Well,
Um,
and we're taking them because there's demand for it, right?
but beside the point, right? So
Well,
I don't think it's entirely beside the point, right? But it's not like people in the US are the only people using drugs, right? Like there are plenty of people around the world who are using drugs. We're
Well,
not the most affluent country on the planet,
but
right?
that's Ken's point, right? It's the criminalization of drug users, right? That's
Oh,
contributing.
so if we wanted to
Is
go
that
down
what
the
you're
path of
saying?
like
No, we've seen
decriminalizing,
we can't do Portland. That's what Portland did. They decriminalized drugs and walking through Portland's like going through an open opium den and you're having record numbers of overdose every month. So we're giving up on a generation of people because we've decided if we give up on drugs, we're giving up on 80% of crime.
so you obviously don't have the history of this podcast. It used to be that my brother was on here with us, who's also conservative, and we had this discussion. Tom, I don't even remember. We talked about legalizing drugs, and we used Portugal as the example, not Portland, Portugal, where they did in fact legalize drugs and built in kind of a system that if you got caught, you didn't go to jail, you went to therapy, right? So they changed the funding for this, and drug use and drug arrests actually went down in Portugal after this.
I've looked at all of this. I looked at everything that you're talking about, and the problem is where we're doing it, we have no accountability. We're taking away all accountability. We have to have the pressure of sending someone to jail to get them to agree to go to drug rehab because drug rehab has a 75% failure rate. So they got to go, fail, then get back and have given a new incentive to go. Portugal set up a system where you had an incentive to go. And if you didn't, and we're not doing that. Portland has set up all these programs, but less than 0.01%. And I may even be 0.001% people taking advantage of them because there's no downside to not going. So we've taken away all the incentive and we're just opening the door for overdoses and we're setting a new record every month.
Yeah. And I'm not disagreeing with you, right? Statistically, you're hitting the numbers in Portland. So if we did a system like Portugal, where there were heavy incentives to get involved in rehabilitation, like that's a whole different issue. So I don't really want to go down the path of like, I don't think we want to debate drugs on the show tonight, right? We're really talking about bail and bail bonds and things like that.
Well,
the reason why I brought up,
I agree with you, but we're saying, but the whole concept is accountability. And, all the things that we're talking about is getting rid of accountability. So that's just one example.
I kind of agree, but at the same time, I would say the US also has one of the highest recidivism rates of any country in the world, right? So this is the number of people who are arrested, they go to jail, and then they go back to jail after they get out. We have way higher recidivism rates than most other developed countries, and that's because our prison system is not reform-based. It's not a correctional system. It's a punitive system. We do very little in the prison system to actually try and reform our inmates. We basically lock them up, we hide them from everybody else, and it's a brutal system. We actually have taken education out of most of our jails. We've done very little to actually try and help them. So when they get out, what are they going to do, right? So I think this is a bit of a problem, and it does come back to bail, right? So I want to bring this back to bail. But I think we have a very serious problem with just like the way our prison system is structured. We lock up a lot of people, often for very minor offenses. I think if we just legalized marijuana, that would solve a bunch of the problems, right? But we don't have to go down that path. So the first point is like we lock up a lot of people, more than any other country on the planet per capita. What does this have to do with bail? we're locking up some people because they can't pay bail. Okay. That is increasing the number of people who are incarcerated. And why are we doing this? Right. I don't know that I fully understand the logic. Now, I get what you're saying. It's like, this is an accountability thing. Okay. Explain that to me. Right. If somebody is saying, like, hey, if I could pay bail, I would, but I can't. So I'm just going to stay in prison. How is that really an accountability thing? They're just not out of prison.
Let me turn the argument around and use the opposite of what you're saying, because you're using the argument that we need to protect the poor. And that's an argument that everybody agrees with. We need to protect the poor. So let me take that and turn it on its head. When we set rules that tie the hands of judges so that they can't hold the poor in jail, then they also can't hold gang members in jail. They can't hold career criminals in jail, and they can't hold organized crime in jail for these low-level offenses that we've tied the hands of the judges for. And what's happened? Well, in our urban cities where that's happened, those same groups have figured out ways to make millions of dollars, money hand over fist. That's what's going on in California right now. You don't get prosecuted in your urban areas for theft under $950. You have major crimes, shoplifting syndications where they're going to Facebook Marketplace. You've got companies closing, moving out of out of those cities because they can't withstand $25,000 a day in shoplifting, and it's all because of, I would even say, some of y'all were well-intentioned, but the impact of it, what y'all have done is you've tied the hands of judges so they can't even address real criminals. I mean, the real problem, because that's the impact of what you've gotten enacted.
Yeah.
So that's where they're not even charging these people, right? Because that's the rule, is that they haven't met this minimum threshold, so they're not even being charged, right?
Yeah, and I'm not going to disagree with you that that's happening, right? Because one of the things that we really try to do on Finding Common Battlegrounds is just agree on facts, right?
Sure.
So conveniently, I read an article just a few days ago about Nike and REI shutting down their stores in downtown Portland because of theft. Right. So you're not wrong on that, right? That was downtown Portland. I'm guessing they're having similar issues in San Francisco. I've heard a little bit about like CVS closing, some different places like that. So I get it.
Nancy Pelosi Federal Building told all the federal employees to work from home because it wasn't safe to come to work to the Nancy Pelosi Federal Building in San Francisco.
So certainly it can go too far, right? And I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that. I think the point is well made, right? Like, you could take it too far and just say, like, hey, you can steal anything up to $950 and we're not going to go after you. I think that's problematic. I would absolutely agree with that. I think that's problematic. I think the one, and I know that you're kind of saying, like, it's a bit of a red herring, this isn't really what's happening. But I think the one that really gets me, and this is what I eventually wanted to get back to, is, that kid on the street who's smoking a joint. They didn't steal anything, right? Yeah, it's an illegal drug. That's fine. They get arrested and they don't have the money to make bond. Okay. Do they really deserve to be in prison until their hearing because they were smoking a joint? Right. Those are the ones that I think really bother me, not the people who are stealing $948 worth of goods, right? And then not having to, get arrested or whatever. I think we would agree, like, that's not okay. But the kid who's smoking a joint,
and say that's not happening. I mean, let's talk about where we are. We've just been through COVID. We have courts that weren't trying cases for a year and a half, 2 years. Your jails, your county jails are absolutely full of the worst of the worst. During COVID, they weren't even arresting misdemeanor people. They weren't taking them into jail. There was periods of time after COVID where, the surety bail system, someone failed to missed court for a misdemeanor, and the jail wouldn't accept them back in after we found them. So I just cannot agree. Look, if you go to Harris County right now in Houston, they don't prosecute marijuana like you're talking about. So I would say in our urban areas where we have a substantial problem, they're not prosecuting marijuana cases anymore. They're not even filing them. Police aren't even filing them. I mean, there's an article out either today or yesterday that in Houston, in Harris County, the sheriff's office for Houston just announced there was 230,000 cases that were closed. And the notation was lack of personnel. They just didn't have enough personnel from the sheriff's office to investigate 230,000 cases. So they just closed them. That's having its, I mean, they're telling people for the last year crime's going down in Harris County. No, it's not. They have 230,000 extra cases that they didn't even investigate because they said they didn't have the personnel. They were hiding the fact that crime wasn't going down.
Interesting point. I'm going to come back to that. I did just look it up real quick. 20% of people who are in prison on drug offenses, and it's typically just possession, right? So it is happening. People are getting arrested.
That's a big difference than marijuana.
Right. I get it. That could be cocaine. That could be heroin. That could be all sorts of things, right?
I mean,
yeah, it could be a number of things. So obviously, I'm not saying that it's all marijuana offenses. It's all drug offenses. On the personnel issue.
Wait, but why should we just? Why are you saying we shouldn't send people to prison that are in possession of fentanyl?
Oh, no, I didn't say that. Fentanyl's different, right? No, I said marijuana. Okay. I was very specific. Like somebody smoking a joint. Come on, that's actually safer than drinking alcohol.
You're talking out of both sides of your mouth. When
I don't know about that.
Not marijuana, but okay.
Right.
What about
cocaine?
Well, cocaine is a different issue too.
If someone is, what is the average time between? And I don't remember the name. Like when someone's charged, and then when they appear to court, is that like 30 days?
It can vary, days? Right? But Ken would know better.
Okay, so
on average,
in Texas, the time between your arrest and your appearing in court is 72 hours.
Oh, that's short.
And you have to have a bail hearing within 48 hours of arrest.
Oh, okay.
And,
yeah. Well, a bail hearing, I'm saying, so if they can't make bail, what's the average person going to be detained? How long would they be detained for? That's what I'm trying to get. So like you get a poor person, he's working at McDonald's and he's like, I don't have the money, I'm short, right? And they're like, okay, well, you're out. Is it 2 weeks, right? And do they have to quit their job? What kind of impact does this have? That's what I'm trying to get a sense for.
Well, like in Harris County right now, when they have their bail hearing, that's going to be part of the discussion. You know, this is what I'm thinking about setting your bail. Can you afford that? If you can't, why not? Okay, family. And so all that's being discussed. And like right now in Harris County, if it's a misdemeanor, you're going to get unless it's on a list of 7 charges, you're going to get $100 PR bond because it's a charge-based release. They don't even look at your criminal history, even though we amended we enacted a statute saying the judges are required to review your criminal history. In Harris County for misdemeanors, they're not. They're violating the law. They're just giving you a $100 PR bond. So that will not happen in Harris County. But see, that's part of the problem. That ends all accountability. That has a much higher failure to appear rate. If you look at harriscountycourtwatch.com, it says for a 2-year period, the average failure to appear rate in Harris County misdemeanor courts using those types of bonds was over 80%.
Sorry, so help me understand.
Failure to appear rate.
It's because it's a low bail amount. You said a $100 PR bond?
$100 personal bond is just a promise that you will show up. You're not paying anything. It's a free bond. But Texas, a bond has to have a financial amount tied to it. So a $100 PR bond, personal bond. There's a JB that hates it when I say PR bond. So I keep hearing him in my head every time I say PR bond. So a $100 personal bond is just a promise that you will show up. And you're promising that if you don't, they can sue you for $100. So personal bond is just a pinky swear promise.
It's a pinky swear. You're not actually going to pay anything, and you're going to leave.
And no one's going to sue them for $100 because the court case is not worth that. No, that's ridiculous.
They quit coming to court, and what happens? They get arrested. They get another $100 personal bond. Then they don't show up. And so I mean, we've got examples of people getting 17 personal bonds, 16 failures to appear, and then what do? Well, they just dismiss their case because their backlog is growing so big they can't hold them accountable because the jail's already full with really dangerous people.
Well, and in this point, it's on the court, right? The court should be detaining them, right, and not allowing them to leave again. Is it because why is this happen? Does the court not have access to their records, or is it that they're overwhelmed or something?
No, Harris County's become very political at the moment, and so it's just it's one theology versus another. And if you're a judge right now, you're just going to give them a personal bond no matter what for misdemeanor court because of the politics of it. And, the damage that's being done to the criminal justice system. I mean, I looked at, they publish a list of the cases that were disposed every month. I looked for August 2 years ago, and over 90% of the cases for the month have been dismissed. So, I mean, they're doing substantial damage to the criminal justice system, and those people see that as a green light to commit more crime. We can go back to Yolo County, where the DA did a study during COVID. He found that for people, low-level people released on a surety bond versus a simple release, no matter what you call it, the person released on a simple release had a 200% greater chance of committing a violent offense in the next 18 months, just based on the type of release mechanism used. And those are terrifying numbers.
It seems like this is something that could be easily, it is like a technology and a kind of a utilization problem, right? We're not using data that could easily stifle the no-show rate, right? We're just not, and I get it, right? We have narratives and what's the word?
Look, we know
politics aside.
We
Like
know
if we-
what will reduce crime, but we're not doing it. We're trying novel things that
Right.
have never been studied, things that, like out of fairness of what should we be doing, things that we now know don't work. We're still doing them because that's what the politics are right now. It's not about lowering crime. If you go back to California, the very start of all this didn't have anything to do with crime. There was a lawsuit saying they were not providing the proper medical care to their prison population because their prison population was 200% of capacity. And they were ultimately ordered to get their prison capacity down to 125, 150% of their capacity. And that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And on a 5-4 decision, they affirmed it. But the minority is now the majority at the U.S. Supreme Court. But here's the problem. The minority is that we can't tell a state just to release criminals into the public. So if you look at it from that light, all the actions that California has been taking for the last 10 or 20 years is not about fighting crime. It's just about reducing their prison population. And that's all it is. They know it's going to increase crime, but they don't care because they just want to reduce. They don't have the will to build more capacity because, we have the arguments being made. We have the most people in jail per capita of any country. And so California doesn't have the political will to build more capacity so that they could address this issue. And so it's not going to happen. So we're just coming up with more novel ways to release people and arguing releasing people will make us safer when it keeps proving us every day that it won't.
So I'm actually just quickly looking on the side, right? So I appreciate this. At crime rates and what's been happening to crime rates, I actually looked at Harris County, Texas. Unfortunately, the most recent data that I could find is 2020, but crime rates have actually been going down up to 2020. I don't know what they've been doing in the last 4 years. I couldn't find that, right? So maybe they've gone up. I don't really know. Looking in California, we're at like historic lows in crime rates in California. They've ticked up just a little bit over the last couple of years, but the peak for crime rates, property and violent crime, was actually in the 1980s and 90s, and it's just gone down. So crime rates are actually much lower than they were historically. And just looking at the numbers, it doesn't look like this is a massive uptick. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not like pro crime, right? I'm not saying like we want more crime. I don't think anybody wants more crime.
Do you think
but just looking at the numbers, well, I mean, I can show you the chart, right? The charts are right there.
I know, but do you think that's accurate?
Look, I mean, sorry, but I just wrote an article on this, whether crime is really increasing or whether it's just, the perception that crime is increasing. And so this is something that I'm very well versed in because the national statistics show that crime is going down. That's not where we have a problem. The vast majority of the country is still following tried and true methods of how to reduce crime. The problem is in our urban areas. And I want you to look, here's where you need to look, car thefts, because the insurance companies still require a police report before they will pay off a car for car theft, a claim. Car thefts is the most accurate, as a result, is the most accurate barometer of what crime is doing. Right? Car thefts are going up 25% a year in our urban areas, 25% a year. And if you use that as the barometer and you say, okay, well, we're not reporting all these other crimes because they're not going to be filed, or we have a reporting. Car thefts is the barometer that's the most accurate, 25% up every year. And you can't look at that and say crime is not a problem.
Ken, you're saying that car thefts the other crime is usually there's a positive correlation with them, and that because car thefts are going up, but other crime appears to be going down.
No, what I'm saying is you question the statistics of others because politics has gotten into it. Like Harris County say, we filed 20,000 fewer cases last year. Well, we just found out 230,000. They didn't even get to the point of filing because they quit investigating. So my argument is the most accurate data on crime right now is car thefts.
Well, and that I guess that's what I'm saying is like, because what you were just saying in California is that they're not prosecuting anyone that stole less than $950, right? So I'm guessing that's not being reported. A crime didn't happen because
it's no longer a crime.
Meet a threshold. Right.
It's no longer a crime. And before, historically, that was a felony in California. And they did a referendum where they said, we're going to change this from a felony to a misdemeanor so that it make it easier for them to find a job. They'll still have to answer for their misdemeanor crime. Then they did that. And then the urban areas, the DAs, with the support of Soros, came in and said, we're no longer going to prosecute those as crimes. And so what's to report? They're not reporting it as crime because they're not going to prosecute it.
Right. And you're saying that because car thefts are still continuing to rise, that's a big enough thing that people are going to report this, right? And then therefore there's usually a positive correlation to show that we can make the assumption that other crime is probably rising, but just not being reported appropriately.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I just looked up car thefts in Tampa. Those are also at a historic low. I mean, I'm just looking, right? So the peak was actually in 2002.
You're looking.
Where do you want me to look? You tell me where to look, and I'll check it.
Okay. Look in Harris County. Look in Houston. Look in
Houston, Texas.
Yeah.
Let's try it. Let's see if car thefts are going up.
Oh my gosh, you're going to make me pull up the research that I did.
Please do. I want to see it, right? Because same thing, peak car thefts was like 2001, and they're down to like half of what they were in 2001. Now they may be going up. This is the most recent data I have here is 2018, but 2001, 2002 is the peak of car thefts. It's getting harder to steal cars. So
there are cities. I mean, there are cities where the mayor is proposing to sue Kia, blaming their rise in car theft on they just don't manufacture a car that's good enough to keep it from being stolen. And I mean, they're not doing that because car theft's down, and they're doing that to try to cover up their problem that they're having. I mean, look, this is an area that I'm very well versed in. I mean, I'll be happy to provide you with the statistics that I did or had for my article. But I mean, we're here on an interview. It's 9:52. It's way past my bedtime.
I know. I just looked at San Francisco. It looks like car thefts have gone up a little bit in San Francisco over the last couple of years.
A little bit.
Yeah. 2021, it was 7,476. 2022 was 7,729. So it went up by 300 cars. And with that kind of denominator, that's like a 2% increase, maybe year over year. And again, maybe car thefts are like way higher and I just don't realize it. But the numbers I'm looking at don't suggest that car thefts are like crazy high, right?
So the 10 states that have the worst rates of vehicle thefts in 2022, Colorado, District of Columbia. Look at District of Columbia.
Sure. Let's take a look.
Washington, Oregon, New Mexico, California, Missouri, Nevada. And here's just one article that says they're up almost 10% from 21 to 22.
Okay, so this article does suggest that car thefts are up pretty substantially in DC. So that's one that I found, right? That one does seem to support it. DC car thefts have gone up pretty substantially over the last couple of years.
Well, and the point I'm making is we don't have an across the board issue. We've got an urban city issue. We've got an urban city crime problem, and we have a political structure which we're trying to, we're not prosecuting crime anymore. And I would even say, who's the people getting hurt the most by this? The very minorities that they say, that these policies are going to help. Where does crime go up faster? In our minority communities. So the people that these policies are saying they're going to help, they're hurting them the most right now. I mean, look at here's something for you to look at. The NAACP in Oakland just in the last 3 months requested or demanded that their local officials do a state of emergency on crime. And the DA came out saying, you're just using right-wing talking points. And the regional NAACP came out and said, we support the local NAACP chapter. Crime is run amok. The governor of of California sent 100 or 75 additional California Highway Patrol officers to Oakland to address crime, and that's within the last 30 days. So, I mean, I don't understand. Okay, it just seems to be we're saying, oh, crime is going down. It's just a perception issue. It's just a right-wing talking point. No, it's not a right-wing talking point if the NAACP is saying we demand a state of emergency on crime.
And I'm not going to disagree with you. I'm looking it up, right? You're absolutely right. That's certainly happening in Oakland. I happen to live, again, in a big city, right?
Wait, could you call my wife and say Ken was right? Just
Sure, happy to do that, right?
I'll give you your number when we're done. Ken was right.
Ken was right on this one, right?
Not when he was coding case law to you in bed, but he was right on this one.
I like that.
I want to put a pin in this one, and like,
Okay.
I want everyone to kind of give their take, their thoughts, if they've been something they've, just sort of like a concluding thoughts on this. And I'll go first.
Yeah, go, Tom.
So two thoughts that have kind of like emerged from this conversation, which was really good. And Ken, yeah, I love the information you were able to provide. Was one, you were saying, you said something, Ken, it was something like, if you can provide an alternate solution that outside of bail bonds, right, then show us what it is. And that's kind of what I see is bail bonds and the whole industry seems to be fixing a problem, right? It's capitalism, right? It's finance. It's like, we can't seem to figure out, between the courts and and criminal, how do we merge this, right? And bail bond seems to be, it's an available service that someone can use if they want to, and they don't have to, right? And it actually seems to be pretty, if it's $1,000 for some misdemeanor, you could do what, you're going to pay $100, and you could do it on a payment plan, right? So $10 a week or something. And anyone should be able to afford that if they have a legitimate reason to get out, to go to their job or whatnot. Now on the flip side, the one thing that just doesn't jive is that if we need to create incentives, and there's an accountability issue, but yet we have some of the highest incarceration rates, we clearly have the incentives, and we're trying to hold people accountable, right? So like, why is there a big problem, right? That's weird to me, right? That doesn't make sense. If we're not holding people accountable enough, why are we incarcerating so many people, right? That's an interesting idea. And then the last thought I had is that if it seems like we could make some decent tweaks to our using, basically better technology, better data, access to data, to make some better informed decisions. And we're just making really poor, detain or release decisions right now that could actually improve the system. And I actually almost could see a system where you wouldn't need bail bondsmen, right? It's like, maybe it's like hey, first strike, you go free. And then after that, we go accordingly, right? If you do any kind of no-show, it's auto detain. That seems like you would, that should be able to create accountability, right? I'm simplifying it, but
yeah,
it seems like we should be able to, right? If you, and I think Ken's exactly right. It's like, if you didn't show before, or if you have extended criminal activity, you're probably a high risk of not showing up, right? Again, that just makes pure sense to me. I was in the fintech industry, and we gave subprime loans to low income people. Guess what was the best data to know if they were going to be a good customer or not? If they were a previous customer, right? That was the best, right? If they were a previous customer, we always gave them a loan, right? And they even if they were marginally okay at paying us back, we would give them a loan again, right? But that was the best data, right? It was past data.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
who do you want to go next?
Ryan, why don't you give your take, and then Ken, you can rebut anything that Ryan says.
I can tell Ryan where he's wrong.
Yeah, that's great. No, I think this is a useful conversation. I think I came into this legitimately thinking like, oh, okay, this is a problem. We're incarcerating poor people just because they can't pay. And I don't think that I'm still there, right? So to your credit, Ken and Tom, right? I think it's more complicated. So I think I would say that, it probably is more complicated. I don't think that the answer, Tom is probably headed down the right path, right? That we could use technology to help us solve this problem. I don't think the answer is necessarily keep bail. I don't think the answer is necessarily get rid of bail, right? It's probably just a more nuanced system that uses better data that's taking into account people's specific situation. It really doesn't make a lot of sense to me if somebody like, Tom gave that hypothetical. Somebody's working at McDonald's, they really just don't have the money to do it. If they could genuinely get that hearing and a judge was understanding and said, "Oh, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. We'll give you the, $100 PR." I don't mean to use your term. I don't want you to get in trouble, Ken, right? But that personal bond, right? That effectively is just an IOU and no one's ever going to pay it. No one's going to sue them, but they come back, right? And if they don't, okay, then we crack the whip a little bit and we hold them accountable the next time. That's fine. I could see that. I mean, I think that's fairly reasonable. If people are abusing the system, then, they don't get a second free pass, right? I still think we're incarcerating too many people, right? Lots of other countries have lower recidivism rates. They don't have as many people incarcerated per capita. There are some bigger issues with our criminal justice system. That's really not the topic of this discussion today, so I don't necessarily want to go down that path. But I wonder to what extent, our bail system is contributing to that. And I don't know the answer to that. I genuinely don't. This is pretty far outside my area of expertise. But I think it's been a useful conversation. So I'm glad that we had you on. Your thoughts, Ken?
We cannot really switch to a release and detain system. And so let me just use some numbers. So if the federal government is detaining approximately 75% of the people who are arrested until trial, the federal government is not the big prosecutor of crime. They're the smallest prosecutor of crime.
Mm-hmm.
There is no state in the United States that could release and detain and hold 75%. We don't have the infrastructure. You're complaining about what we have now. The infrastructure we would have to do that would be incredible. New Jersey has tried it. They've already had to do one tax increase to fund the changes, and they ran out of money again. And so when we're looking to replace, we're always looking to improve the system. We always want to see how we can improve it, but we don't want to make it worse. One of the concepts is first thing we want to do is do no harm. The reforms that have been tried, that have never been tested, that we're being told we have to do as a result of fairness, are doing great harm to the system. And let me tell you just a couple of the harms. The jails are filling up. The jails are full in Texas of really dangerous people. So we can't hold anybody accountable on low-level crimes. And they're seeing that as a green light to commit more crime. And so today's misdemeanors is the training ground for tomorrow's felons. And we're creating a system that is just creating chaos, that chaos creates de facto decriminalization, and decriminalization creates more crime. We see crime going up in our urban areas where they're doing these things. And I can even point to a specific situation where they changed what they were doing and crime went down. And it's a case called Sanchez versus Alabama that had to live under a preliminary injunction for 4 or 5 years, where they just had to do simple release under a federal order. And they finally won it, and it got reversed. And I did a podcast with the sheriff, and he said, we came back, we re-implemented a system of accountability. If you didn't show up for court, there were consequences. And about 6 months later, the mindset of criminals changed and crime went down. Until we're willing to do that in our urban areas and reestablish a system of accountability and not allow somebody to miss court 17 times and just give them a new personal bond every time, we know what to do. It's just our politicians are unwilling to do it in our urban areas. And what I would just finish with is the current path we're on is not sustainable. So it will change. You are seeing it right now where the mayors are calling for change, where the NAACP in Oakland is calling for change. And the reason why is because the damage that is being done to our commercial property values in our urban cities. In San Francisco, commercial buildings are selling for 30% or 50% of their value from a year or 2 years ago. And there's going to be defaults. I saw an article yesterday about commercial property defaults, and that will lead to city defaults unless things change. And you see the mayors calling for it right now. And so I have great hope because what we're currently doing is not sustainable.
Cool.
All
Thanks for your
right.
thoughts.
Yeah. All right. Ken, you good to stay on for this next one? Got another
Sure.
article for you. All right.
Absolutely.
Tom, you want to introduce it? So we're
Yeah,
totally, from a
I'm
different
excited
direction.
about this one. Uh, so Brian, did you hear about, I sent you the article, but had you
Yeah,
heard about this at
I
all?
did.
You did. Okay.
I'm very into tech stuff, Tom.
I
I
would be,
I love my AI stuff.
well, the way you made it sound like this was the first you'd heard of it. Just maybe the way you worded it. And so I was going to be surprised if you hadn't heard about this because this was a big story. Google
Yeah,
stock fell 4%
I
yesterday.
know.
And this was,
I
so
know because
basically here it,
I have Google stock, so I was like, dang
you're like, hey,
it. Nvidia's
so
stock was down today too. Goodness, what's going on?
Google's answer to ChatGPT, it was barred for a little while, and then just recently they were running on the called a thing called the Gemini algorithm, or
Yep.
it's not even an algorithm, it's their AI model.
Yeah.
And they then sort of rebranded it, and they now went on Gemini 2, and then they rebranded Bard to be Gemini. So Gemini is the
Right.
platform, and they're using Gemini 2. Anyway, that kind of broke. I think it was Thursday or Friday or something that came out, and then over the weekend it was crazy. All the stuff that came out about it, and it was essentially if you use ChatGPT, it uses DALL-E for image generation. Well, Gemini uses its own as well. And so if you asked for like, show me a founding father, it was showing a black George Washington. If you asked for a Viking, it was showing you a black Viking. If you asked for like what an American looks like, it was black or some colored person. It was very hard, almost impossible to find a white person unless you specifically ask for it. Even like they'd say, show me a Nazi, and they were showing like Asians dressed in Nazi outfits. So that was really interesting. And then, but there was some also not in that article, but I saw it was yesterday, was someone had posted, is it okay to be black? And Gemini was like, yes. It was like, is it okay to be Hispanic? And Gemini was like, yes. Is it okay to be something else? And it was like, yes. It was like, is it okay to be white? And it was like, yes. But, and it had this big caveat paragraph that was like, but is it okay to be white is a common phrase used by white supremacists and is often associated with people that are better. We should consider that all diversity is a good thing, and da, 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 da. So huge caveat on is it okay to be white. So very like Gemini went full racist on us basically, and it's and right, and so it showed an incredible bias in its system, and that's so obviously there was a lot of feedback. Google did apologize, said they're going to work on the problem, and they're going to try and fix it.
Well, they stopped letting Gemini generate people until they fix the problem.
Yes.
So Gemini
yes,
can still generate images,
generation.
but not people, because that was the primary issue. So they turned that off for now.
Yeah, I mean, it is the primary because it's most visual, but clearly even that text thing, right? Is it okay to be white? Is it, like the text answers clearly showing some bias as well. That was very interesting. And what did it say in the article? Here's my fear. In the article, it says Elon Musk's response was, his fear is that they're just gonna make it less obvious. Right? They're just going to make it so that you can't see it as well, but that bias is still going to be there. So yeah, very concerning to me.
Concerning why though, Tom, right? So my immediate response when I see this is, yeah, okay, right. Like this is problematic. That's fine. I haven't used Gemini much. I used Bard when it first came out for a couple of days just to try it. I have a paid subscription to ChatGPT, and I use the image generation all the time. Right. I use it all the time because it's a much more convenient way for me to generate images when I'm teaching my classes. I used to go out and just like use Google image search for different things, and I'd hope that I could find the right image. And now ChatGPT will generate amazing images of all sorts of weird things that I'm like, oh, I want to illustrate this, but it does a great job. But one of the things that I've noticed with ChatGPT is that I don't have to prompt it to give me diverse people. Okay. So I can say like, hey, give me an image of, 5 people playing soccer, and it will generate an image that has like a Black person, a white person, a Hispanic person, an Asian person, and it's diverse built into it. And I like that, right? I don't have any problems with ChatGPT generating diverse people, because that makes it easier for me to then take that to my classes, which are filled with diverse students. I don't want just white people in all of my images, right? And I like the fact that I don't have to ask it to do that. So in my mind, that's actually a
Diversity
good
is built
thing.
in. It's a
Yeah,
feature,
diversity is
not a
built in,
bug.
and right. Now, obviously, what Gemini was doing was pretty problematic, right? When it's like, hey, give me a picture of a Nazi, which I don't even know if ChatGPT would do that because it's so locked down, right? Like you can't ask it for anything controversial. But if you ask it to give me a picture of a Nazi and it's like, here's a gay Black man who's dressed in Nazi, like that's really, really problematic. Those are the people that the Nazis were killing, right? So I get that it's not context specific and it's not generating that. I think that's really, really problematic. They can obviously fix that. That seems problematic. But having diversity, this is actually an improvement over where we were 10 years ago. I don't know if you remember when Facebook was actually using their algorithms to go in and tag people's images. Do you remember when this happened? And Twitter did the same thing when it was actually Twitter before it became X.
When you
They
tag their
had
face?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it had automatic software that would go through and it
Oh,
would like
right.
kind of try and find people, and then it would generate tags. And for many Black people, it would offer tags of like gorilla and chimpanzee, and like it was really problematic, right? Like really, really racist algorithms at first, and then they started working on that and trying to fix it. Have we gone too far? I think Gemini has gone too far, right? I'll just straight up own that, right? Like I think Gemini went too far, where it's like, nope, we can't generate images like this. Okay, it went too far. So they fix it, right? I get that this is kind of a big story, but is it really? I don't know. Ken, your take.
Okay, so I'm going to say this a little bit differently than the two of y'all. I'm going to say this is a race with AI, and you've got Microsoft's version, you've got Google's version, and you've got Elon Musk's version.
Mm-hmm.
The clear one that's ahead right now is Microsoft's version, and it has had a big impact on them. In the last week, Microsoft surpassed Apple's
Market evaluation.
market valuation.
Yeah, they were at $3 trillion.
And as a result, and part of the reason why, or the reason why, was because of their share of this AI and the future of it. So we're talking big money for AI going forward. The way I look at Microsoft's version, it's not ready for prime time. It's just not ready, and they're racing to catch up with ChatGPT.
Yeah,
Now,
for sure.
and so, and then Elon Musk, I would say, must be even behind Google, because I don't even know if he would be in the conversation at this point if he wasn't Elon Musk.
Right.
But there is going to be, there is a race for this AI technology, and I have played around with a little bit with ChatGPT, and it is phenomenal on the things that it can do. And it's, I used to be so technologically proficient. I feel like I am showing my 63 years and I am way out of date. I feel like I'm now at the stage where I'm asking my daughter to show me how to do something on my phone. That's where I feel like I am with Chat GPT. But I think that this is a race going forward, and I think we're cutting corners. I think Google is trying to catch up, and what we're seeing is cutting corners. Now, on the diversity issue, I don't really care about that. I don't really have anything to contribute towards that. But what I do think, the only thing I will say is, I think we're losing our history. And I think that's a bad thing. But if we request a picture of one of our founding fathers, we should get a picture of one of our founding fathers. We shouldn't try to manufacture them to be something that they're not, whatever they're not. And so I have a problem with trying to paper over our history. I don't think our history of this country is something we should ever be ashamed of. It is our history. If we don't recognize our history, then we are prone to commit the same errors that we did in our history before. And so it's just become cycles. It's just like we go back to the stupid crime issue that we're talking about. We're committing the same errors that we committed in the 60s, where we felt safe, and then we were more forgiving, and crime started going up, and then people started fighting, being tough on crime. And then we got a backlash, and we got Ronald Reagan, we got tough on crime. We're doing the same thing now. And I think we're maybe committing that same cycle of error with this Chat GPT and Google's version, and who know what Elon Musk, but we've got a race going on, and Google's not ready for prime time.
Yeah.
Ryan,
Mhm.
what is more important, truth or diversity?
Ooh, that's a fun question. As an aside, I've got ChatGPT up right now, and I just asked it for a picture of founding fathers and Vikings, and they're all white, right? Which is kind of fun. So ChatGPT is obviously context
But
specific.
isn't it what they are in history?
Yeah, and that's what I was saying. Like ChatGPT is getting it right. So I think Ken's point is actually I'm going to come back to you, Tom. I'm not skirting the question. It's a really tough question, but I think Ken points is a really good one, that Google is behind, right? Like they know they're behind, and they're cutting corners. They're doing the best they can to catch up. When they released Gemini, they have these like ratings and tests that they do to determine how good, one of these LLMs are, these large language models. And they claim that their score was actually higher than ChatGPT's. I'm not buying it, right? ChatGPT is really solid. It's pretty good. Okay, so coming back to your question. Oh yeah.
I haven't, like, the last 2-3 months, I just use ChatGPT instead of Googling things, right? And like that, so Google should be worried. They should be worried, and they should be, and they are playing catch up, like to what Ken said, for sure. But I don't even think this is so this is really interesting, because I don't even think this is a catch-up thing or a quality thing. I think this is their inherent bias that's in the system. Because someone showed, I was watching a video that was sort of unrelated. It was just talking about England and stuff like that. But they said, if you look up shoplifter, if you Google shoplifter, like Google shoplifter right now, shoplifting or shoplifter, in Google Images, and there's a movie called Shoplifter, so you're going to see screenshots from that, which is a bunch of an Asian family. But then, but you'll also see all the stock images, and all the stock images are white. Like, you will not find an image of a black shoplifter. And they were just saying, that's interesting. And so this goes.
I just did it, and I found like about a third of them are black people.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
I didn't find any. And so there is, what I'm saying is, this bias, I feel, is already here. It's in, this could easily be in Gmail, right? This could be in Google search results, right? This inherent bias that's so just shifting the conversation slightly a certain way, which is a thing that a lot of people are worried about, of like, Facebook algorithms and things like that are slowly putting subtle pressure in a certain direction, that are trying to create a bias, right? And in a direction that they want. And I think that's dangerous. And like I said, which is more important, truth or diversity?
Truth. Every time.
Yeah.
Truth.
So
Yes,
that's an interesting question. I think that question's a little bit more complicated, right?
Ooh.
Yeah. No, and here's why I would say that, right?
No.
It seems on its face like it's a really easy solution, right? Like truth. We just go with truth. Truth is always the right answer. That's nice and easy. Truth is
easy.
Capital T truth is really hard to arrive at, right? We don't always know what the truth is. And a lot of times what looks like the truth isn't actually the truth.
Right. We actually usually don't like it, but we like our version of the truth.
Yes.
But we don't like the truth. I agree.
Exactly.
Hey,
and so
let me make a point about that. I had somebody, I was on a blog, and somebody made this point about, we can teach morality without teaching religion. And then they came back to it and said, well, but if you are teaching morality without a foundation of religion, then you're just teaching your opinion. So when you say, well, it's not that simple, the truth is not always, no, I mean, I'm a religious person. So in the religious world, there are truths. And so there are truths that we can't get around. And thou shalt not kill is a basic truth. And so I think it's very difficult to teach morality without a religious basis, because then it's just your opinion. And so I think if we start equivocating everything, then there are no truths. then we undermine our whole society. We have to have truth in our society. And so we
So,
always go with truth.
so I love that. I don't necessarily want to get into a debate on religion stuff, right? But I would even say, like, I literally just had this conversation with my students in my class that we were discussing the basis of their morality. And I said, okay, let's throw this up, right? One of the 10 commandments, thou shalt not kill. And I was like, is it always wrong to kill? Come on, Ken. Is it always wrong to kill somebody?
Absolutely. Now, does it mean that you don't or you won't, especially at war? But that
Self-defense. Somebody tries to break into your house. They're coming after your wife, and you happen to shoot them.
That doesn't mean you're not guilty of the crime. That means that you may not be punished for it. But that's maybe a defense to it. But it still doesn't change the fact that it's wrong to murder. That doesn't mean I won't do it to save my wife or my family. You know, Texas is a castle doctrine state. So you break into my house, you know, I'm not going to be worried about whether I'm going to have just cause to kill you. I'm going to kill you to protect my wife, who I love very much. And so, but that still doesn't mean it's not wrong. It's a violation of a central truth. It's just,
see, and I would actually say in that case, it's not wrong to kill, right?
Ken,
you didn't do anything wrong.
I mean, your point, Ryan, is there are times when it is appropriate, right?
Yeah. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying, like, no one's going to hold you accountable if somebody breaks into your house and you kill somebody. You may still feel guilty, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, you haven't done anything wrong. Right?
That's not true. You still have. You will. That is something you will have to answer to God about when you get to heaven. I don't care. You still will be having a discussion about that at heaven.
You maybe you were overzealous and you didn't need to shoot, right? There is
there are all sorts of complicating things. But then, I mean, we could even just turn to the Bible, right? The Old Testament is filled with God telling the Israelites to commit genocide, right? That's in the Bible, right? It's pervasive.
Look, when I get mad, I tell people I'm an Old Testament Christian, so eye for an eye. So just come on, buddy.
Right. So I mean, this is why I equivocate when you're like, there's truth and there's diversity. And I'm like, well, truth is complicated, right?
Yes.
And I would love to agree with you that there are like absolute truths, things that we can all agree on. And I think there are probably some that we could get really close. Like, I think most of us would agree most of the time, like, killing's bad, right? Like, most of the time, killing's bad. I think most of us could agree with that. But truth is complicated. It's not always that straightforward. It gets a little bit messy. And this would even include when it comes to things like diversity. So even truth about diversity gets complicated. So that's why I equivocate immediately when you're like, is it truth or diversity? I'm like, meh, what do you mean by truth? What do you mean by diversity? Right. And of course, like, I'm a college professor. We love to get into the weeds and nuance on all sorts of things. And we wrestle with truth and we wrestle with diversity. This is literally what we do. That's why I'm equivocating. I wish I could just be like, there is truth and it's easy and here's the answer. I just don't think it's that easy. I think it's complicated.
Yeah, I completely agree. It is not easy and it is complicated and it's messy. I think it is like a self-evident truth that we should always be seeking the truth, right? That we should always be seeking it. Even we should always be in the pursuit of it. And someone gave this they said the definition of sanity is the commitment, the ongoing commitment, I'm paraphrasing here, the ongoing commitment to what's the word, dealing with or encountering the truth, right? Like dealing with it and trying to be engaged with the truth, right? And it's when you stop doing that, it's become delusional. And I think that happens on an individual basis, but that happens on a societal basis too. When you stop, like, well, things, I think it's there's many genders and things like that. I think you are not taking reality, you are avoiding reality and you're not accepting truth. And I think that's what creates insanity. And I agree, truth is nasty. And like I said, we love our versions of the truth and we hate other people's versions of the truth. And that's why we get so tribal, right? And we get so weird about, those people are evil or dumb or uninformed, right? They must be because we've got the truth. Right. And we hate looking at other people's truth, but I think we should always be in pursuit of it. And that should be like the top value, but diversity is important, but it should always come second to truth.
Well,
Yeah.
let me make 2 points. So when I was in law school, you would take a course and you would go through a series of cases. And the first case would set out the rule. So it would set out the truth. And then the second case would nuance it. And then the next case would nuance it. And so by the time you got the truth and you got, well, if this, if this, if this, if
It's
this,
watered
if this,
down.
if this, and well, I mean, and you've got all these different things, but you start out with the truth. And the truth may be that, okay, this was a crime, but the rest of the story may mitigate either the crime entirely so that
Mm.
you either will be found not guilty or you will be punished with probation or nothing or barely
Sure. Yeah.
anything. But that, to me, that goes to punishment, not to whether a crime has been committed. And we're now at the point in our society where we're questioning whether the truth should even be the rule anymore. And I think that is dangerous to our society, because when you start doing that, then eventually you go to vigilante justice. We go to the old west again, because we have to have justice. And so if we can't have any truth and everything is equivocated, we have to look at circumstances. There's nobody has a truth anymore, or worse, where we are, especially sometimes I feel like on our college campuses, where my truth would have me personally attacked and being told I'm a racist or I should go to jail just for being for what I'm thinking. We've just done a 180 on what we've ever known. I mean, it just seems like we've turned day into night and night into day, and we don't have any truth anymore. And I think that's part of the problem. So I say truth at all times above diversity. Truth, truth, truth.
Yeah. I'll just add one thing and then we could probably wrap up. It's weird to frame it this way, right? Because I don't usually frame it quite that way, but I like to say that I'm a knowledge creator, right? So I'm a scientist. I actually do research and I create knowledge. At some level, that knowledge is truth. So one of the things that I think universities are trying to do, even though we do complicate things, right? We get into the weeds, we do complicate things. We are actually trying to pursue truth. We just recognize that truth is complicated at times. So I love pursuing truth, right? And I try and get that across to my students all the time. When they say something, I'm like, well, but is that true? Right? I like to push them. I want to push them to see if they're actually getting at truth, or if this is just their opinion, or if this is just their own biases, right? Whatever it is. And sometimes they are right. And sometimes I'm just playing devil's advocate because that's my job. I'm there to make them think, right?
Yeah.
I'm not there to indoctrinate. I could care less if they come out of the class agreeing with me or disagreeing with me. That's never my purpose as a college professor. It's to get them to think and to explore truth. I think that's really, that is my job. My job at the end of the day is to pursue truth. It's just truth can be really, really complicated.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a family of educators. So my parents were public school teachers. I taught high school for 2 years before I went to law school. I was teaching in a junior college night program when I was set up on a blind date with my wife. So, I mean, so I I grew up very poor. Education was the ultimate equalizer in my life. And so, I think that education is crucially important. And I've always stressed to my daughters, the importance of college. It's the ultimate equalizer for them. And I have a special needs daughter, and it's even more so for her. Um, because of her physical issues. But I think we're corrupting that. When we see evidence of schools pushing, we're not stressing education, or where you see a public school in an inner city where no student is proficient on grade level in math. We've got bigger problems than worrying about social issues. I mean, we need to be dealing with these kids will be trapped in their circumstance if they're not proficient in math and reading when they graduate. And we are setting standards that are almost ensuring that. It's making it go right back to when I was teaching high school, and I had a 16-year-old girl in my class who was the daughter of a single mother who got pregnant at 16. She was probably the second or third smartest person in the class. She got pregnant at 16, and she was going to repeat the cycle of her mother. If we're not careful, and if we're not concentrate on the truths of math, the truths of reading, the truths of of what you need to have to be functional in society, we're going to just set a generation up to repeat the same cycle and live in the same cycle of poverty that their parents lived in because we haven't given them the tools, and that's on us. And when I see diversity versus truth, if we don't hang tough on the truths, that's what we're doing to a generation.
Okay.
Well said.
Yeah.
That was great.
Yeah.
And thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. It was good having you, Ken.
It was a fun conversation.
Thank y'all so much for having me. I've enjoyed it a lot.
Good. So just, thanks to all of our listeners. We've got another guest lined up in a couple of weeks, so we'll be back in touch. But thanks, Ken, and thanks, Tom, and have a good night, everybody.
Tom, look, we don't always agree when it comes to politics, but if there's one thing that we do agree on, it's that there's only one way to clean up after going to the bathroom, and that's with a Lux bidet.
Listen, I've been using bidets forever, all right? And Lux is the best, all right? So, I mean, I've got like the little squatty potty thing and the bidet. It's like a whole experience. It's actually, it's probably one of the highlights of the entire day. But like, it gets me clean and it gets me ready to talk politics in a civilized manner.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. Every time that I use a toilet, it doesn't have a bidet. When I go to a friend's house, I just don't use their toilet, first of all. But that's about as uncivilized as it gets. So civil conversations demand civil hygiene practices.
That's why everyone should get a bidet.
And just to be clear, right, we want to make it clear, listeners can get their own Lux bidet with 10% off by ordering at luxbidet.com and using our promo code FCBG10, Finding Common Battlegrounds 10. And the last thing that we want to say, Lux is supporting this podcast, but they don't support one side or the other. They support civil conversations and clean butts.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Finding Common Battlegrounds. The music is by Ben Sound. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and not those of their employers. For more information or more episodes, you can find us at findingcommonbattlegrounds.com.